Hi, this is Phil McCauley from Labour Business TV. Today I've got with me Philip Ross, the Ambassador for the Self-Employed. Philip, welcome.
Hello, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me today. Now, first of all, before we get into what's happening with the self-employed right now, tell us about your role as the Ambassador for the Self-Employed with Labour Business.
Yeah, I'm very pleased to. In Britain today, we've got 5 million people who are working self-employed. That's more people than actually work in the public sector. And we in Labour Business have long felt that Labour is not just a party of small business and for small business, but of small business and of the self-employed. Our membership is made up of huge thousands of members who are self-employed themselves. And the goal within Labour Business, and through my role in particular, is to give those self-employed people a voice in the Labour Party, because we need not just a voice in the Labour Party, we need a voice in the economy and in policy as well. So that's what we're working very much to do, to network, bring together all those thousands of members across all of our constituencies who are self-employed, running businesses on themselves, to actually come out and actually speak up, so that we can make the party stronger through that voice of the self-employed, and actually obviously make the country a lot better as well.
Very, very interesting. 5 million is quite an incredible number of self-employed. It's an enormous sector, enormous part of our society, and incredibly important in terms of earnings for the state and exports. Tell me this, how are the self-employed being treated by the Chancellor's systems at the moment during the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting when you look at the self-employed, of course, it's not just one group of self-employed, just like we used to think of the elderly as being one group. The self-employed, they are not just one group. It's not just tradesmen or anything like that. It goes across the whole economy, from the creative industries, to IT professionals, actors, journalists, and right today, which is very important, is actually all the carers working in the care homes. There's thousands and thousands of carers working in the care homes who are self-employed. The concern that we've actually got as self-employed workers actually during the current crisis is that actually we kind of felt a bit forgotten at the start of this. Actually, there was a big rush actually to say, crikey, we need to actually secure and look after everybody. So public sector people will all continue to be paid. We're going to furlough everybody who is actually who's employees, which is good, and actually supporting business. But actually, one of the key businesses in our economy was forgotten: the self-employed, actually. And then when they suddenly turned around and the Chancellor said, "Oh yeah, we need to look at that," he said, "Oh, it's a bit more complicated. Actually, it seems to be a very complex area." Congratulations, welcome. You're starting to understand actually what it's like for being the self-employed. It is very complicated, because you're not quite sure whether to look upon us as employees, or you weren't quite sure whether to look upon us as businesses. On this particular occasion, you said, well, actually, we're going to look upon you not as employees, but so we're not actually going to give you an initial furlough. And eventually they've kind of come around and they've actually said, okay, we're going to sort out some furloughs for it. But our concern is that we were quite happy to support business, actually, but actually the self-employed weren't actually seen as businesses straight away, actually, for people to support. And that's actually been our big concern. Our big concern is actually going through this whole crisis, there's that if you're a pensioner, your pension's going to be paid. If you're working in the public sector, you're going to get all your money. If you're working for a private company, you're going to get furloughed with 75%. But for being self-employed, and all that was fully accepted, but being self-employed took them a while to come around to it. And they said, okay, we will support the self-employed, but grudgingly, grudgingly. It's a favour to you as the self-employed. And the money's finally coming through, but actually it kind of stuck in the throat a little bit, actually, that we weren't seen as proper businesses till the very last moment.
So in a sense, this pandemic has actually brought the self-employed to the attention, finally, of this government, where they're being properly valued as fully contributing members of society, paying their taxes, doing their work, employing themselves. And this is a very interesting moment in that regard. What does it mean for the future when we get after the pandemic, when people are back at work? I mean, how many of these self-employed jobs will even still exist? I mean, what are the risks right now?
Well, the self-employed jobs may well continue to exist. People are going to struggle, are going to fall onto hard times, actually. And the idea of actually being, having a system where people, particularly the more precarious type workers in our economy, who need to be able to actually claim benefits and then go back to self-employed work when they've got it, and switch between one and the other. We're not very good at that in this country, and it's the whole universal credit hasn't really helped with that either. But you go to places like in Brussels, actually they've really got it in Belgium. They've really got it. Actually, the self-employed can switch from being in work self-employed, then needing help actually to go and sign on. Now, the problem is going to happen, which is what happened after the financial crash. There was a huge crash, and there was a huge people did literally I thought the expression I'd say, but got on their bikes really and actually went out and got work, and they actually found work for themselves as self-employed. And we like to see more of that actually when the economy picks up. But actually we've not, but all of our welfare and all of our business support and everything is all designed around actually full-time permanent employees. Yeah, it's not designed and built around the self-employed. And that's one of our big pushes for the next Labour government, actually, to be the champion for the self-employed. It's natural territory for us as a party to actually stand up for the workforce. The workforce today is the self-employed. You could have gone back actually 20 years ago and you could have said to people, you've chosen to be self-employed. It was your choice to actually go down that path. For the next generation, that is not a choice for actually people. And what we need is a government that actually puts in place stuff that actually makes your long-term life as a self-employed worker sustainable and gives you that support, which previously you might have got through the company or wherever you're working, but now we've actually got to create it again. It's a huge challenge for us.
Now, you've done a lot of work on IR35 and taxation for the self-employed. Where are we presently at, and where does that need to go in the future?
Yeah, well, the IR35 and self-employed, it's actually one of the, it hits the very nub of actually the issue of what on the self-employed, particularly, and right across the whole of the spectrum from musicians, right, and teachers, right the way through to care workers and doctors, actually, but actually that you can be, under IR35, we're entering this very dangerous territory that people are going to be taxed as employees, yeah, but without actually the rights that come with employment, actually, which is very dangerous, actually, ground for us to go. And when you start, when you mix this up, actually, you suddenly find that people can't get, they can't claim expenses for travel and other such things. One of the big crises that hit the NHS before COVID-19 actually came along was that actually they reclassified lots of NHS workers as being caught by IR35 and therefore as employees, and meant they couldn't claim for transport. So you had lots of care workers and others now suddenly classified as employees for tax purposes, and it wasn't, and they couldn't claim any accommodation if they worked in hospital, say in Leicester and in Nottingham and in Derby, and they might travel between all those three. All three will be considered to be employment, not self-employment. So the cost of travel expenses to move around or even stay overnight between these could no longer be claimed. Of course, what happened was people said, well, it's not worthwhile doing that anymore. So they actually lost flexibility in the system as a result of this. Elsewhere in the economy, we're going to need flexibility for people, and it's going to be across all sectors. And with IR35 suddenly removing the incentives, actually, or the not so much incentives, but removing actually any of the benefits from being self-employed, it's not going to be worth people actually trying to go self-employed. And those that do, actually, the risk is not going to be there to be paid off.
So when we think about policy going forward and the Labour Party's position under the excellent new leadership of Keir Starmer and his team, of course, we've now have Ed Miliband welcome back as Shadow Business Secretary, with a very clear vision for a new green economy boost after the pandemic, information he's released in the last few days. What are the opportunities for the self-employed to kind of harness the post-pandemic recovery? And what is your policy message to Ed and his team?
Well, our policy message is actually to Ed to say, remember that great document we wrote for you before when you were leader, the freelancing agenda, which actually set out actually a set of policy objectives actually for you to follow to support the self-employed, and actually not just to do, but to empower the self-employed in this country, because the recovery isn't going to be through huge, big, giant corporations actually leading us out. It's actually going to be lots of small businesses and the self-employed doing lots of small, agile work, innovation, productivity. That's where it's actually going to be coming from. So huge grants to big companies isn't necessarily where it's going to be. It's actually going to be encouraging small business, actually, and on the green agenda, that's exactly where it's actually going to be. It's actually those those grassroots of actually stuff coming up small and becoming big, actually. So it's actually, we want recognition, respect for the self-employed, actually, and giving them something to make them sustainable, so that actually so they can actually deliver that innovation and that change and deliver prosperity, not just for themselves, but for the whole country.
And what about young people and entering the workforce for the first time? I mean, what are their opportunities if they want to be self-employed? How can they access finance? How can they get going if they want to start their own companies? Where does the land lie right now in those areas?
It's a lot of difficulty, actually, and there's almost a bit of the people starting out on themselves without any capital, or any capital within their families to actually support them to actually get started. It's actually quite tough. But unfortunately, it's a market that's actually opened up, and lots of young people are going to be going into the self-employed world, actually, but without actually anything behind them to support them. So, for instance, if you come from if you want to start up a business, yeah, and your parents own their own home, yeah, they could actually put up a bit of their mortgage actually to actually secure you to actually get a loan. Yeah, well, it might even just be to get a van or to get other things actually to get you started. Yeah, which is great. If you actually come from an environment where you don't actually own your own home, you come from a social housing background, you haven't got any of that equity to back you or in your family to actually get you started. Yeah, and it's a huge sort of gap actually in the whole economic model, which we need to get in and address, because we've got all these fantastic entrepreneurs, yeah, who could get going, but actually being stopped by the fact, not just but lack of finance and lack of that equity or anything and the assets to actually to move them forward. But we've got, like I've said earlier, we've got for my generation, actually, it was a choice to be self-employed. We could actually make the choice. Actually, the next generation, it's not going to be a choice. Actually, this is going to be a career, a long-term career, from one self-employed role to another, to another, to another. So, how do we make it sustainable for the long term? How do we get proper pensions for the self-employed? How do we get sick pay and benefits actually to support people through the self-employed? How do we help the self-employed actually get through maternity, paternity, those life events that we're used to? And also, how do we actually look after people when they approach retirement, actually, from being self-employed as well? So we've actually got to rethink our model. Yeah, we can actually say, I think there's been a lot of talk saying, well, we don't want self-employment in the economy. Well, we do. If you ask all the self-employment, when they're actually waving, yeah, they're not waving for help. Actually, they're waving for recognition. And actually, it's a huge opportunity for us to get in there as the labour movement. And if you think back 150 years, the labour movement, one of the bedrocks of the labour movement was the cooperative movement, actually, which was actually empowering people economically. And the unions were actually to give people rights, and the mutuals were there to actually give them financial support. And it's those three cousins of the labour movement we actually need to bring together this time. There are still rights for the self-employed, right to have a contract, right to be paid, right not to be bullied at work. So still a strong role for the unions and for co-ops, actually helping people actually come together, actually create prosperity and work together, and for mutuals, actually people putting money aside together for insurance, for sickness and pensions and other such things, and proper access to finance. Because 150 years ago, nobody gave workers actually any finance. They actually put their own money together to create it. And the great triumph of the labour movement was it empowered people. Yeah, and that needs to be what we want to do for self-employed. We need to create an empowerment for them.
So, in summing this all up, you think it's possible that part of the recovery could be led in the vanguard really by the self-employed?
I do. I think actually a lot of the recovery, those green shoots and everything like that will push through, because a new economy is going to emerge again out of this. And actually we need, and for us to be successful, actually we've got to empower people, not just do things for people, actually empowering the self-employed actually to come through. And when I talk about the self-employed, these aren't just people now who are self-employed now. These people are going to be self-employed because their jobs have been furloughed and they're falling down, actually, to help people get up, stand on their own 2 feet, and actually be proud and actually get through and actually do this. So we've got to rise to that challenge. And the problem we've got, I think, is Conservatives talk about themselves as the party of business, but not many of them actually really come from that grassroots business area where they've actually really been cut, they've had to cut their teeth and build businesses up from nothing, or working hard and through self-employment. And that's the gap that we've actually got in Parliament, actually. And I think, and that's my concern about the advisors around Boris and everything like that. He's got lots of hedge fund people around them who can advise him on that. But, but we need advice, not on the public sector, not on hedge funds, but actually on what it's like to actually work for yourself and actually start and push through and build something out of nothing.
Philip Ross, thank you very much for joining me today, and stay safe.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye-bye.